I think a lot of the space we do in this country, at least maybe not so much these days, but earlier in the late 20th century, is very what I think of as leaky space. Like the buildings are spaced too far apart, or they don't, or the open space is really just so naked and empty. That then something's supposed to happen there. But it was like when we were in architecture school and you would draw these certain kind of plants that look like they only belong in a fern bar or whatever that used to be called.
Welcome to Inside the Apple Studio, a podcast that talks with architects to learn how they use Apple products in the practice of architecture, with your host, Neal Pan. Support for Inside the Apple Studio comes from Monograph. Monograph is the cloud-based practice operations solution built for architects by architects. Learn how Monograph can help you be more productive at monograph.com. Welcome to Inside the Apple Studio. In this episode, we'll hear from an architect who is the founder and principal of his own firm and has developed a vision of enhancing the communities of northern New England. His extensive background in historic preservation and adaptive reuse contributes to preserving important pieces of architectural history. He's a nuts and bolts guy with a passion for efficient construction methods and techniques for achieving maximum sustainability and energy efficiency in buildings. I'm pleased to welcome architect Chris Kennedy to the show.
Hi, Neal. Great to be here.
It's been a while since we've spoken.
Yeah, I miss our weekly masterminds. Now that I had to replace you, I'm not sure I've ever done as good a job as you were doing. So,
well, I appreciate that. Thank you. So let's get started with what inspired you to become an architect?
Well, I'm not really sure exactly, but when I was a kid, well, my father was in the military, he was in the Navy. And so we would travel around every couple of years. And, we were always moving to new places and looking for new places to live. And so my parents used to drag me along to communities that were being built in the late 60s, early 70s, like Columbia, Maryland, or Reston, Virginia, because we were often back and forth to the DC area. And we would go look at model houses, and there would be these big developments with like 2 or 3 model homes, like on one little block, and you would go and you would wander around. And they were always, trying to be impressive. So I don't know, I kind of went and we were always analyzing these like houses at some level. And then also, same reason as moving around a lot, we traveled a lot. And my parents took my sister and I to Europe 3 times, on these space available flights from bases to over to Europe and stuff. And we would spend 2 to 3 weeks traveling around. Did that about 3 times when I was young. And so, got to see all these different buildings and all of this stuff. And then took a drafting class in high school.
The notorious drafting class.
Yeah, and I think I also thought architecture was probably a cool thing to be. Maybe it was like Mr. Brady or something, from the
Brady Bunch.
Yeah, and so I just ended up going to school for architecture, which was great, and
been doing it ever since.
Been doing it since then, yeah.
So you went to the University of Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm.
What inspired you to choose that school?
Yeah, that was kind of random too. Well, I think my parents loved the idea that it was a Catholic university. So, and I like the idea that, that had a good football team, I guess, good entertainment.
Right.
And, and I think this was all the time before I was really aware, like my kids have, are launched in the world and gone to school. But, the analytics that people put into figuring out what school to go to these days was nothing like in 1976. So,
right.
I applied to 4 places and, and then I just chose the one that seemed the most prestigious at the time. If I had been paying attention, one of the things that's great about the program at Notre Dame is the 5-year degree, and the 3rd year is spent in Rome the entire year is spent in Rome as a class. So, that's pretty amazing. They have their own buildings in Rome that where the studios are and stuff, and you get to travel a lot. And you only go to school 3 days a week. You go Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. You get 4 days off to travel. You get to travel on your own over the holidays, and then you travel as a class, on a number of week-long field trips and things. So I think that's pretty impressive about that program, and it's a massive highlight in everybody's school career. So I mean, it worked out. Yeah, and obviously I wouldn't change it, but
So you had the travel bug
hmm
as your parents took you around Europe
right.
even before you went to Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Then you got a chance to spend an entire year in Notre Dame. How do you think those experiences influenced you as an architect over the rest of your career?
I think I'm not sure I've been able to implement what the influence was, because oftentimes we're doing just one building or two buildings, but place and space, especially, what buildings do to create space, the outside space that where they enclose, semi-enclosed areas and things like, plazas and piazzas and squares and things like that has always been a very big thing in the back of my head whenever we're trying to design buildings. But oftentimes we're not doing enough buildings to create that. But occasionally we do get that opportunity, and that's some of the things I really like, especially even in single family residential, is trying to like create that outdoor space that goes with the house,
Right.
and getting people to understand, like, you don't just walk out and have a place and it works really well. It needs to work with the way the building or the house kind of um, snuggles it a little bit, or wraps around it somewhat, or provides a good backdrop, those types of things.
Yeah.
I think in the U.S., kind of somewhat in the way we do development, the way things, we've had a few hundred years, but we haven't had like 5, 6, 7, 800 years of infill and filling in and developing. So I think a lot of the space we do in this country, at least maybe not so much these days, but earlier in the late 20th century, is very what I think of as leaky space. Like the buildings are spaced too far apart, or they don't, or the open space is really just so naked and empty, that then something's supposed to happen there. But it was like when we were in architecture school and you would draw these certain kind of plants that, look like they only belong in a fern bar or whatever that used to be called.
Right, right. So after Notre Dame,
Yeah.
you graduated. You worked for a couple of different firms for almost 10 years.
Yeah.
What was that experience like, and what did you learn from each firm?
Yeah. So I worked for three different firms before starting on my own firm. And I think the first one was interesting. It was a fairly large firm. It was about 50 or 60 people. And it had departments, very siloed kind of scenarios, sort of had like a developer housing team. It had a design team for all the other projects that they did, sort of like two or three principals that had one or two people working for them that would design the projects. And then they had four or five, construction document teams. So I started working for a little while in the construction document team, but then I spent most of my, 80% of my time there working in the design department, if you will. And I learned a lot about like egos of different principals who uh, each like their own designs, but didn't like the other partners that they were designs, and how you would kind of sneak things through, to get your way and things like that. It was a lot of politics and things in that firm. The next firm I worked for was created by a bunch of refugees at the SOM office in DC in the mid 80s. And then that firm grew quite a bit. I was like the 12th or 13th person there, and it was like 50 or 60 when I left four,
Wow.
4 or 5 years later. But they they did more integrated teams, and so you had the opportunity to start near the when the somebody put together the initial design, and then the team would refine that, and then do the construction documents and get the permitting and everything, and then somebody would be kept on to work with the CA. We did have a CA department, I think, but somebody on that team would do all of the submittals and visit the site occasionally and stuff. So you got a full, beginning to end opportunity to see and sizable projects and things like that. And then I moved to northern New England, and had never really done much in the way of wood construct, wood framing and things like that. It had all been concrete and steel in DC. So I worked for a small firm in Woodstock, Vermont. We did a school, we did some houses, we did some other small commercial projects. But 92 was a recession year,
Right.
and myself and another person there at the firm, basically the same age as me, we could see like that things weren't going to last. The principal didn't really do a lot of networking or marketing, so he just relied on like the phone ringing occasionally and getting a project. So we were planning our exit, but in the meantime, we got laid off. So we then, had decided to start a firm. So that's what we did. We gave it a go.
Now, before we get to the firm you created, I'm curious, since you had a number of years of experience in different ways to develop projects.
Mhm.
And what I mean by that is you had one firm that kind of had a design department, a
Right.
production department, if you will.
Yeah.
And then you had a more integrated sort of experience. Did you have a preference between those two?
Well, I think if you're, I don't really. I mean, I think if I had to work in a place with silos, I'd probably prefer being more in the design end of that. But that's a little bit um, seems unrealistic to me because there's so much that if a building is going to be successful about how it goes together,
Mm-hmm.
that you don't learn in that situation. Like in my first 3 years, that my experience was pretty lacking, I think, in terms of that. It was a lot like, it wasn't much different than school in some ways. You know what I mean? The level of, I mean, you had to be a little more savvy about what actually could stand up. But
Right.
other than that, it wasn't that fulfilling if you want to have a long career. So I think learning everything as soon as possible, and as much depth as possible is the way to go. I mean, personally, I think,
Okay.
and especially if you're going to end up, when you end up in a smaller firm, you absolutely have to. You know what I mean? You
Right.
can't compartmentalize anything really.
Yeah. So recession comes, you
Yep.
branch out, start your own firm. That must have been a scary time.
Yeah, we made $320 the first year. We had
No
to split
kidding.
it. Yeah. So, so then, it took a couple of years because it was a recession, and we were both flatlanders in that, meaning that we weren't native Vermonters or native New Hampshire people. So, and it did take we had both only been there a few years, so it takes a little bit of time to get ensconced in the communities and stuff, which is really kind of what I was looking for moving to northern New England anyway, was that idea of uh, being very present wherever you were going to be, rather than in a larger city or something, until you're like 45 and networked your way, or maintained gotten to a certain level. It takes a while to become seen. Whereas in a smaller community, I thought, it could be more part of the fabric right away. So, and that's pretty much been the case.
Yeah.
We started a firm, and I would advise. I mean, I would advise against using letters that are can be confused for something else. So it was Alpha and Kennedy, which we shortened to UK Architects. And then I don't know how many questions I got about are you from England? Are you from the
Right.
UK? And even later, as social media got more, we got followed by so many plumbers and electricians from the UK.
Wow.
Thought they were networking with architects over there, but
I think you were missing an extra letter there. See, you just needed to add that third letter and then you would have been okay.
exactly. Well, when people would ask us, I mean, I used to tell them, well, it doesn't stand for the United Kingdom. It stands for unbelievably knowledgeable. And that always got a little laugh. So,
Well, it made me laugh.
yeah,
Yeah, that's great.
yeah,
That's great.
yeah.
So I'm curious, what took you to Northern New England, though? You were working in DC before.
Yeah, it was 89. It was time to think about having family. We were living right down in the center of the city, and was a bit questionable, like how things were going to turn out, because it was the crack epidemic.
Right.
The mayor of DC, was caught smoking crack in a hotel room with a prostitute. There was a lot of gun violence in DC. Um, and I mean, in reality, if I had thought about it a little bit more awareness, really we weren't living in a part of town that was overly affected by that, although peripherally. But you think about kids and you think about you know how that's going to work out. So this idea of being more part of the fabric of the place you live, and yeah, it was a great place to raise kids and up here.
Right.
Um, and it's not hot and sweaty like it is down there.
That's good.
Yeah.
So with UK Architects and you and your partner that joined and created this firm, what was your role in the firm and how did that go?
Yeah, so we kind of started out as Hunter was the sort of like the front end, tried the guy that was tasked with trying to bring the work in to
Mhm.
some degree. If we had to choose between us, who would do that? And then I was more the push the work out, get the work done. Although we both had to, like, when it was just the two of us, we both had to do everything. That was a good division of sort of like the basic labor, if you will. And then it was interesting because we didn't really focus on any specific style or any specific niche of work. So, and we used to always tell people when they'd ask, "Oh, do you do houses? Do you do this? Do you do that?" And we'd say, we're more like the country doctors of architecture. So if you have like cancer or a hangnail, the doctor needs to cure that, right? And so if you've got a design issue, we've got to figure it out.
Right.
So it's not as efficient as doing the same type of project over and over again, but it's always interesting. So we've done everything: commercial, institutional, single family, multifamily, retail, and a little bit of everything.
Do you find that being in a smaller community that's really necessary in order to be successful as an architect in a smaller community?
I think here you can make it as a single family residential architect just fine if that's what you want to do. And then I think otherwise, I do think you have to kind of be more nimble and more multifaceted, with all the other different things. There's not that much of, or at least until recently, as this area has grown a bit more, there wasn't that much especially when we were starting out, of any one thing that would keep you fully occupied.
So when we first met, which was several years ago now,
Hmm.
you were sort of making a transition to being more the front end person. Was it that
Yeah.
your partner had kind of retired at that point and you were becoming the front person now? What was that like?
Yeah, well, he didn't actually retire. What happened was 2008, as we all know, was the big mother of recessions, and it
Right.
lasted a long time for lots of architects. And he didn't have as much staying power in his family as I did. And my wife had a very good job. His wife was, was doing a variety of things, but hadn't really nailed a consistent long-term job with benefits and all those other good things. So he got a really good offer from one of our clients, which was a prep school that we had done two or three really nice projects for, and he became their chief operating officer. So, which means that he had to like manage all the budgets for all of the physical plant. He had to make sure that the vehicles were full of gas, but he also got to do some planning of projects that would be coming up and things like that. So yeah, it was a good thing, and he didn't have to worry about where, was he going to have enough work to keep him busy? He probably has more work.
Right.
So, but that left me continuing on, and what was very interesting, having at that point probably been over 20, a little over 20 years as, in a 50-50 partnership, if you will. I didn't really know that I was maybe missing any kind of freedom. But what I did find was that all of a sudden, and in the soon after Hunter moved on, it was whatever I really wanted to do. I could just say that's what we're going to do. That's how we're going to
Right.
do it. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. It was kind of there was kind of this extra freedom that I hadn't really realized that would be happening. So that was unexpected breath of fresh air. In other words, I wasn't really looking for that. It wasn't really a problem per se, but it was something that just happened. So that was interesting. And then, but then I think after a few years of that, in wanting to make the business a little more robust and have a little bit more senior kind of staff to rely on, I reached out to another local architect who was self-employed, sole practitioner, and asked if she was interested in maybe doing a little bit more, making creating a larger firm together. And we did a little test run, on a couple of projects to see how it would work out, and it worked great. And it's been great from day one. And so Sloan and I have been 50-50 for about 3 years, maybe 2.5 years, 3 years. It's amazing.
Do you find having a partner a little more comfortable since you had had a partner for so many years before?
Yeah, I never want I never I'm not I don't have a really big ego, or I don't, and I'm always trying to be collaborative and get along with people. I've taken those like enneagrams or different personality tests, and it always says that I'm like the person who's like trying to resolve people's disputes, or like be more diplomatic or collaborative and things like that. So yeah, I like having somebody to bounce things off of. I don't like I would lose my mind, I think, being all by myself doing doing things. I'd always need somebody to ask, what do you think of this? What do you think of that?
Is that from a design aspect as well as a business aspect?
Yeah, everything.
Okay.
Maybe it's insecurity. I'm not sure. I mean, maybe I need that reinforcement that that's a good idea, or no, that's not a great idea, or whatever. But I always find that throughout my career, especially even now, ever since the firm started, like if one of the principals would be working on a design, taking the lead, designing something, and then show it to the other one, and get some feedback. And there would be often times where I thought I had like done this just killer design. Like just the plan was working so well, and then somebody else takes a look at it and they go, well, yeah, they weren't very excited. They weren't as excited as I was about it. And then they would make a few comments and you would go, all right, I'll take a look at that. I'll see what that's like. And then, you tweak it and you move it around and you refine it, and then it's even better. And that's, and I would have, and before I asked them what they thought, I thought there's no way this plan could get better. I
Right.
mean, it was awesome. So I've found that collaboration just makes things better
Yeah.
almost all the time.
With UK architects and now Mayor Kennedy architects, what's been the level of staff that you've had over the years? How large have you gotten? And
Mm.
maybe not have to share how small you've had to get at times, but
No problem.
yeah.
All cards on the table. So we started the two of us back in '92, and I think we probably a couple years, and we started hiring people, and that's always that just the decision to sort of like add somebody to your firm, like be responsible for meeting a payroll, even if it's
Right.
just one other person. That's a little daunting until you do it. And then once you get it going and you have other people, it's very hard to not have staff. It's liberating. And I also like the idea of mentoring people as best I can. But we've gone from the two, then we up till, and at 2007, 2008, we were up to 13 people. And then in 2011 or 12, we were we were back to the two of us plus maybe two other people that were really limited part-time. And then took a little while and we slowly grew back, and we're now 10 people right now with a summer intern. So we'll be 9 people next month. And I think 9 or 10 is the max in my mind in order for two principals to manage and also bring in enough work and things like that. It's not impossible to keep that size busy, especially here in a slightly rural area.
Over your career, you've taken an interest in sustainability and energy efficiency. Where did that all come from? And what have you done over your career to further those efforts?
Yeah. Well, I wasn't very interested in the beginning. I mean, I think I was much more interested in like this idea of design, just design for design's sake. And, once I started learning how buildings went together, and then when I moved here, where we have significant change of season, you could physically just see things that had to do a lot with energy efficiency visibly. Like you could see houses that had we'd have a major snowstorm, and 2 days later there'd be no snow whatsoever on that roof
Hmm.
because it had all melted off completely because there was no insulation whatsoever from these older houses. And then you could see a lot of buildings that were done in the 80s and 90s where people were starting to think a lot about energy efficiency, but hadn't really worked out any of the kinks. And so you would see a lot of houses get built where there were massive ice dams along the perimeter because it wasn't there was insulation, so the snow was melting slowly, and it was building up at the edge, and then it was forcing its way in, this classic ice dam leaking back in through the roofing. And then finally, we began to understand about air sealing and as being as important as our values, and using and learning more about the building science. And now you can see like higher performance buildings sustainability has always been something, very, very concerned about. I think buildings that get really well utilized are more sustainable than buildings that are, I think, energy efficient, but aren't that heavily utilized. I think something that's utilized and loved will always be taken care of and will last really long for a really long time. So we strive to think about how well a building's going to fit in and meet the needs of the users and the community. I think that's really, really important. And then one of the things by reaching out to Sloan a few years ago to ask her to join in, she's one of the most knowledgeable people I've ever met about sustainability and energy efficiency. She understands the technical aspects of that much better than I ever did. And I've learned a lot from her, even in the last few years. But one of the other things is that there's a real challenge, I think, for all architects. We get told all the time by webinars and the AIA and magazines and everything that the architects have to be the ones leading the charge on sustainability and energy efficiency. And I think we all do really try really hard, but I think the even more important or more capable of leading that charge are our clients. And I mean the clients more, I mean the clients who are, developer type of clients who are constantly building buildings, and they know that they should be doing this. And I don't think that I really feel like it needs to be just as much on that entity of people, that type of group, as it is on the rest of the design community, because we don't have control over. We're being hired to generally speaking do what they're asking us to do, but we're bringing our expertise and knowledge and commitment to giving them a really good product. But there are some things that cost more money up front, which will pay off in the end. But depending upon how projects being financed, or how the money is going into the project, and if somebody's building something to sell it 5 years from now, they don't necessarily have that long-term commitment. So finding out how to move the needle on that is always challenging. I mean, we tell our clients on every project that this is really important to us and that we're committed to this, but that we can only, really get as far as what that budget or that client commitment is, and so
Right.
I think that's the really, really huge challenge, is that we can tell each other as architects that we should be doing this and that we should be telling our clients to do this. But if our clients don't do it, we can only do some of it. We can't do all of it.
Right. So you've practiced for a number of years now.
Mm.
How has the practice of architecture changed over your career that you've had your own practice?
Everything goes much faster. You do much more work, or you get much further. You move the project along much faster every day than it used to. I don't know. I go back to started working in 1981, and everything was on paper or mylar. And used to say, "Don't draw more in the morning than you can erase in the afternoon." And and along with that was the other founder of this firm, Hunter. When we first met, he had one of those metal electric erasers,
Oh, yeah.
and if you used it enough, it would get really hot. So he actually had an oven mitt that he would wear on his hand when he was erasing. So, and then electronic communication, obviously this is almost in almost any career. I think the electronic communication has just really like changed. I remember when I first started, we would send something across town, and you would send it by mail and it would get delivered 3 days later.
Right.
And then you would have to wait for them to call you up and talk to you about it. I remember the very first fax machine I ever saw, which was a little tube that you put a piece of paper in, and then you put it on this cradle, and you took the handset from a phone and you put it on the handset recesses on the thing, and then it would spin for half an hour,
Right.
and it would send this really poor image to somebody on the other side. But then I've been in the hand drawing to digital documentation to BIM. The thing that is now is that drives me the most crazy about the changes is with when you're working in BIM, which is phenomenal, advances in like, being able to see things always in 3D at any point in time. But you kind of have to provide more information into the software to get something to see. And it's a real challenge, trying like it's always been a challenge in architecture to try and go, how far do you go before you review it with somebody, and then how do you iterate from one version to the next and move things forward, and what decisions can you delay in order to work other things out. Whereas with the process we have now, we have to kind of just add a lot of information and make a lot of decisions earlier and sometimes they get made a little bit too early, I think is a challenge. But I would say speed, the amount of stuff I could do in a day if I wasn't answering the phone or answering emails is phenomenally more than what I would have ever thought I was doing when I first started, in terms of it in a day. Just the ability to, do things. That whole not having to redraw every option over by hand,
Right.
doing like 3 options for somebody, how much of that was just repetitive retracing the same thing so you could put the little piece that was different, there. That's phenomenal. That's always been one of my favorite things about going digital was just I could do options without.
Right. Without having to redraw it.
Yeah.
So, as someone who's practiced for
Hmm.
almost 30 years of owning your own business, what are your next steps? What are you thinking as the next steps in your career?
So I've been now 40 years since I got out of architecture school, and uh, you know, I've just determined that the thing I'm least like to do anymore is project management aspects, just constantly herding cats and, always responding to issues that come up maybe during construction, that need to be adjusted or rethought sometimes. Those just take a lot of energy to keep up with, and I'm starting to lose a little bit of that energy. I actually just became a grandfather 3 days ago, so for the
Oh,
first time. So,
congratulations.
so yeah. So thank you. So that tells you sort of like the energy level I have at this point. But so I'm thinking, we need to transition somebody. Do need to transition somebody into my role or into part of my role to keep the firm moving forward really well. And so what I'd like to do is go back into the operations side of things, like how to improve things in how we do things, how
Mhm.
to mentor some people, how to do firm management stuff as opposed to project management things. You know, improve our proposals, improve our processes, things like that.
Yeah.
As I phase my way into the horizon, and that will allow somebody else who's most likely got project experience to start taking more of a more leadership role on projects, and then get some mentoring in how to run the firm over time.
Right.
So that's where I think I'm heading. But I want to do that. What I want to do is I want to do that while traveling slowly around the world. So I want to do it as a digital nomad.
Get back to more of your traveling.
Yes, yes. So there's nothing I love more than actually, just traveling and seeing stuff. So I'm trying to figure out how I can do that. Hopefully in about a year, get started doing that. So we will see.
So, where did you think your career in architecture would take you? Is this where you thought you would be at this point in your career when you maybe first started, or had you not thought that far forward?
Yeah, so I think not really having a great big ego or this idea that I was going to have my own firm. I never was one of those people that in school, knew they wanted to have their own firm. So I really just like, the doing of the work, the being, coming up with designs, working things out, and what did we all do on a regular basis. So whether I owned the firm or I did it for somebody else wasn't really that important to me. I became a firm owner, I think, as much by necessity as by anything. But I have to say, I do love it. I like the fact that I can do what I want to some degree. I mean, within reason. But I could have been in a support role for my career. I think, as I said before, the collaborative nature of this profession, is probably the most attractive thing to me about it. And getting to wear black and the certain kind of eyeglasses, and and just
The
being really
look.
cool. People thinking you're really cool
Right,
because you're
right.
an architect. So.
Okay. Well, I think that's a great place to take a short break, and we'll explore a little bit more about your Mac experience and Apple products right after this. How do you manage your firm? Are you using dated and clunky software? Are you frustrated using spreadsheets and never really getting a clear view of the status of your projects? Then I'm happy you're listening, because inside the Apple Studio sponsor Monograph can help. Designed by architects for architects, Monograph allows you to track your time, your projects, and your budgets, and you can do it all in real time. They have a feature called Money Gantt, and with this awesome tool, you can immediately see whether you are under or over budget on a project, along with their new tool, Resource, which allows you to reallocate your team's time and track its impact on your remaining budget. You can easily adjust your projects on a week-to-week basis. Monograph makes this easy. So help support Inside the Apple Studio by checking out Monograph at monograph.com. Be proactive with Monograph. Well, welcome back, Chris. You've taken us through quite an amazing architectural journey, but now let's discuss how you started using a Mac and eventually other Apple products. What was the first Mac you owned, and how were you first exposed to the Mac in general?
The first computer I ever used was a Mac. It was 1984. It was at the second firm I was at, and one day the little, like, I think it was a 512, the little
Mm-hmm.
box, the little kind of yellow gray box appeared on a Lazy Susan between me and the guy next to me, and we then started typing all of our correspondence letters because there
Mm-hmm.
was no email at that point in time. And so there were probably, like, it was a firm of like 25 to 30 people at the time. So there were probably like a dozen of these Macs. And, the firm I was at before had four or five sort of secretarial positions that typed everything. You would like hand write out the guts of a letter and they would type it up or whatever it was, and they worked on these, I think they were called word processors, at that point in time, the machine was. So that little like 512, whatever came after. I think there was a predecessor. Was it the Lisa or the something or
Yeah,
whatever?
the Lisa
That
came out in a year before the Mac in
yeah,
1983.
right. So one guy in the office had a Lisa at his desk, and then then I remember, I think we might have between 84 and 89 probably upgraded, to an SE, a couple of S to the SE or whatever it
Right.
was. It's still a box, but a little bit bigger. I remember we were all enamored of was it Apple Draw or
Oh, it was
something that
Mac
was a
Draw.
Mac
It
Draw,
was
Mac Draw.
Mac Draw.
And
Yeah.
yeah, we were all enamored of that. And we would all be like, in our side or free time, we'd be like doing little graphic things in there that were, I look back today and they're just so pixelated and whatever. But yeah, so we, and what happened was like the stable of people who did like secretarial type work disappeared from the offices at that point in time, because we could all do our own correspondence pretty much right there. Then I think we had a Mac SE when we opened our firm. I actually did work briefly at a firm, the firm in Woodstock, worked a little bit in AutoCAD on a, I guess, a DOS. I guess it was a
Yeah.
DOS machine at that time, but I don't even know how I even knew how to use it, because I think I turned it on and I just opened the software and I worked right in it. But we did mostly hand drawing at that point in time. We did a tiny bit of AutoCAD,
Yeah.
and we hated doing it because we had one of those pen plotters that if the humidity changed,
Right.
the pen would rip the paper constantly. And so it took forever to spit out a set of drawings.
Right.
So it was much more productive to stay with the hand drawing at that point in time. Then the next thing that happened was in 96, 95 or 96, when Steve Jobs had left Apple, and they licensed the operating system.
Right.
They licensed the Mac OS to third parties, and there was a company in Austin, Texas, that started building boxes,
Yep.
that looked really ugly like PCs, but they were a lot less expensive than the Mac
Right.
or the one from Apple. And so we bought a bunch of those. So we were basically working with the Mac OS, and we started using Vectorworks. We selected Vectorworks as the software to use at that point in time, and when it was called MiniCAD at the time,
Right.
and then basically we just kept, then that little experiment on Apple's part, when Jobs came back and stopped doing that, we bought those fruity tooty iMacs and started getting laptops and everything, and now we've just over the years been just doing it. But I have to say, Sloan, my newer business partner, she's not a Mac evangelist.
Oh no.
so so I we are not 100% Mac anymore, because, and this, as things have become more cloud based, which is nice, platform is a little bit agnostic at some level.
Right.
You can use this other than Revit, which we don't use. We use ArchiCAD now, but you can be on a Windows machine or on an Apple machine, and you can work on the same files because they go back and forth,
Right.
and it doesn't matter. So in some ways that's good, but I do find that the Windows machines have are a little more problematic than the Macs.
Yeah.
So I think it's always been that way. I think you may have paid in the past, paid a little bit more for the Mac, but it came with less problems. It
Right.
worked better.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned casually there something that you're now on ArchiCAD.
Yeah.
When did that transition happen from Vectorworks to ArchiCAD?
So I loved Vectorworks, and I still love Vectorworks, but probably in around uh, around 2014, 2015, Vectorworks, they kept telling us they were BIM, and they are BIM, but they weren't. it wasn't robust.
Hmm.
You would watch the beach ball of death, right? Spin and spin and spin.
Yeah,
And I don't even know. I've never even seen the beach. I haven't seen any kind of beach ball for the last few years. They must have just gotten rid of it completely. And
it's still there.
I don't lock up anymore.
Okay.
So that's the thing, like ArchiCAD was robust. It was more, it just, it just worked quicker within
Yeah.
the machines. So we would spend a lot of time watching our screen waiting in Vectorworks. Vectorworks, the drawings look nicer. They have a more architect. It's easier to make them look like an architect drew them than an engineer.
Hmm.
I think Revit and ArchiCAD, that's the biggest problem I have with those really high-end BIM thing is that you have to spend a lot of time if you want the drawing to be what I'd call legible, you
Uh-huh.
know. But yeah, so that happened about 5 years ago. I will have to say, so this is showing my age. I don't use ArchiCAD personally.
Okay.
So I still, if I need to do some kind of 2D digital drawing, I will open up Vectorworks, map it out, and then export it to DWG, which can be imported into ArchiCAD, and then it can be 3D
Right.
with somebody else can do that.
Yeah.
Because the problem with that is there's way too much to know about. Like I've never been in a position with ArchiCAD or even if it was Revit or whatever, where I could use it all day long enough to learn it
Hmm.
because there's so many things, buttons to click, menus to choose from, like things to manipulate to get things to do certain things.
Right.
And because you're doing more than you were doing when you were drawing in 2 dimensions and then extruding it up,
Right.
you're pretty much, and there's so much stuff that BIM wants to know. So
Yeah.
I have just not done it, but I constantly am pushing people to think that when they say, "Oh, you can't do that with this." I'm almost always right when I say, I think you can do it this, I think you can do that. I think if
Yeah.
you think about it, if you can find, because these programmers that create these things have really, they're trying to impress us. So,
Right.
and I'm often right telling people like, you can do it, you can figure it out.
Yeah.
So
You have somebody champion that transition in your firm since you personally weren't doing that?
the staff was like, they were tired of watching the screen be locked up, and they kept saying like, if you go to one of these others, you will we will be able to work more efficiently. Obviously, there was a huge price point difference
Uh-huh.
between what Vectorworks costs to per station and what ArchiCAD and Revit cost. But and as a small firm, still trying to work our way out of the recession to some degree, we had to be careful about how we spent that kind of money all at
Right.
once. So we did it, and we haven't looked back. I mean, it has been more productive.
Hmm.
The only problem I've had is that the drawings just don't look as nice.
Not only transitioning programs, but what was it like to essentially recreate all of your defaults?
Yeah, that I don't. We've now become, we've got, so let's see. So there's the two principals, and then there's the office manager, and then the rest of, so the 6 or 7 other people, we call them the core team. And so they meet an hour every Thursday, and they discuss improvements or things they found. And it's sort of like, what did I learn this week, that the rest of you should know? Or since going to BIM, we have these like templates that are sort of like, have a lot of settings in them that, so when
Right.
you start a project, a lot of things will just happen behind the scenes the way you want them to some degree. And so we're always refining our template. And so that the core group takes care of that. And then we do a like a 5-minute check-in on what the core group's been talking about at staff meeting. And then and then Sloan and I can ask questions and we can make suggestions about things. It has a lot to do with like, do we want things to look the way they've always looked since before, since it was a hand drawing, like, what does a door schedule look like, kind of thing.
Right.
Or, and then what did these Hungarian programmers, that do ArchiCAD put into things you can choose to have in your door schedule that we don't care about, but somebody in the office thought, oh, why don't I just stick that on there? And you look at the drawing and you're like, we don't need that, get that out of there. Kind of thing. So, there's so much.
Yeah.
And I know large firms do have sort of like BIM managers, and
right.
and people that aren't even doing projects, but they're just managing how other people are doing or learning about things and stuff. And challenging in a small firm, so we do have one person here she's working for us since she got out of school. She's about 5.5 years in. And I don't think there's anybody out there that could know this program better than she does.
Yeah.
At this point. I mean, she's just phenomenal. She can remember, you can be talking to her on the phone about how to do something. She's probably like changing her baby's diaper while she's talking to you, and she can tell you, click on this, you drop down to this line,
right.
click on that, and it'll give you this pop-up, and then click on that. And
yeah,
unbelievable memory for just like everything in there. But after 40 years, I don't think I have room for that. I wish I did.
Yeah. What other applications or services do you use to manage the rest of your practice? How do you deal with your like a common contacts calendar in a small office like yours?
Well, one of the things we do, or I do anyway, is when I choose a software to work with for almost anything, it has to have a really nice interface, a really good look to it, So we've in the last year and a half, 2 years maybe, we've started using this software called Monograph, and it does all our timesheets. It helps us do project scheduling, task management. It's just about ready for us to start using it for our invoicing, and it's beautiful to look at.
Mm-hmm.
And so therefore I like using it.
Okay.
That's sort of like what the Mac is, in a sense, what using Macs is all about. They're beautiful pieces of hardware, and you enjoy looking. I mean, as an architect, you like design, right? It's like, I've always been amazed at firms that have just had rooms full of just gray boxes that were just boring, and just, they're designed by engineers, and not to say that they're wrong. It's just, they're just utilitarian, and that's it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I've been surprised that architects would put up with that in general. But I'm saying Monograph is one that we've been using. But two things that have, and these aren't necessarily. One of them is Mac centric, Morpholio Trace. So like when you pine for the old days of architecture, of hand drawing, but it's a lot like it's a digital hand drawing combination. It's a little challenging, I think, because it's only iPad based, and it would be nice if I could at the very least open these files up without converting them to PDFs on my laptop as well. One thing that does drive me crazy, and I don't think it's just an Apple or Mac thing, I really want everything to be iOS and Mac OS. I don't want this like, I can only use that one on my iPad or my phone, and I can only use this on my computer.
Right.
I mean, I want to be able to use it all across the board. But Morpholio Trace is one of my favorite apps of all time. Just to be able to, I do concept sketching. And it's awesome to do that connected to Zoom and do it on the screen with people. It's better than using those limited capability whiteboards that come with like Google Meet or Zoom or whatever. and it has that architectural quality to, even if you're a horrible sketcher, it still looks better.
Uh-huh.
It looks better when you use Morpholio Trace than if you use a different sketching program. So I love that one. And then the one thing that has been a great thing and isn't Mac specific, but sort of going to this internet-based phone systems, virtual phone systems. So
Hmm.
we use this one. We've tried like 4 or 5 of them over the years, and this one is the best we've tried. Ring Central, and it has it has all the phone stuff that you need and rings through to your cell phone, so you don't need a desk phone anymore, right? You just have your cell phone, and it's a work, it's something coming through Ring Central versus your regular phone plan. You can
Uh-huh.
tell the difference. But it also comes with like apps that works. You can switch talking to the phone and then and then switch the phone call to your computer. Just morph it right through. You can it comes with a interface for internal messaging that's very much like Slack.
Okay.
So we can do our phone and our sort of internal messaging threads all in Ring Central. It's really made a big difference, and we really started utilizing it to its capacity once the pandemic came along, right? Because everybody
Right.
was remote. So that's been great. We were using Zoom types of WebEx and GoToMeetings or whatever they were ages ago. Back in 2005 and six, I was using the early versions of that because I don't like driving during the daytime during work hours. I find it so frustrating that I could be doing some work, but I'm just driving.
Yeah.
So these virtual meetings, we've been doing them forever, but obviously they've just become much better, things like that. But really the thing about the Mac at this point is, for me, is that it doesn't break down. It doesn't you almost never have a problem, that you have to deal with
Right.
anymore. And now that a lot of things are cloud based, you even have trying to have a server, you don't need that anymore. At least, especially for a small firm, you don't. And so that whole aspect of like, one more box that might not work perfectly, you don't have to worry about anymore. So
What do you use now for that sort of for file storage? I mean, ArchiCAD, you're probably storing on the cloud for your projects, but what about other documents and things that you would use?
yeah, so we use Google Drive, and we have everything in the cloud, and a lot. We're getting pretty close to a terabyte of documents because we have everything. But so then people just sync what they need to their laptops, and then but I pretty much have the entire. So the last laptop I got a 4 terabyte hard drive so that I could take the entire terabyte of files
Yeah.
plus the half a terabyte of project photos and put them all on my hard drive, because I'm the one person in the office who's moving between all kinds of stuff. It's like I'm looking at old projects to get examples of things to include to send to a client to say, we've done these before. I'm going into this other place. I can't wait. If I had to like go to the interface and go, okay, sync these files to my laptop now, I would be losing my mind. So I just have my laptop and our entire cloud are basically the same thing. Everybody else just uses bits and pieces as they need it.
What about for documents in general? Are you using like Office 365 or are you using Apple's products like Pages and Numbers or?
I love Apple's Pages and Numbers and Keynote and everything, but we are using Google Sheets and Google Docs because that whole like shareability, immediate shareability, like even we would have to be using the Office 365 in their cloud scenario, and then that would be another cloud
Right.
scenario along with, so while Word and Excel are further ahead in their capabilities than Docs and Sheets, at some level, all the stuff you mostly need is in the Google suite.
Right.
But I mean, again, it's like if you care a lot about how things look and feel,
Yeah.
it's easier with pages and numbers than it is with the others. I mean, the flexibility and the granular ability to change the look and the templates that it comes with are just so much nicer.
But what's your favorite? You've kind of alluded to it, but articulate your favorite thing about using a Mac and other Apple devices.
I do feel like I've drank the Kool-Aid a little bit, but the fact that it's an ecosystem, that
Hmm.
kind of plays nice together. Like I will tell you, I am absolutely certain that Google, if I'm using Safari on my computer and I'm using Google Docs or Google Sheets, I'm pretty sure they make it go slower on Safari than on Chrome. And there are some days when I can go and I'll be working on a spreadsheet. Like we have this like 8-page spreadsheet that has all these inner links for figuring out our fees and how much work we're going to do and stuff. And I'll be trying to do that on Safari, and oh my God, it will just be painfully slow. It'll be like 10 steps behind me, right?
Yeah.
And then I'll go, "Ugh." So I'll open it in Chrome and it'll work perfectly fast. And I know there are enough people using it in Safari that they would normally want to keep it moving, just fine. But I think they just do that just out of spite. I just
Yeah.
think, even though nobody would admit it.
That's a story and we're sticking to it, right?
Yeah, it's outside the ecosystem, right? So
Yeah.
I mean, Chrome has some really cool features, but the only thing I've ever had malware associated with anything on the Mac that I know of has been Chrome. And I always get every 6 months of because I use Chrome, one or two things are designed to work better on Chrome than they are anywhere else.
Right.
And so I use it I have it open, but I don't use it except for those things. And then it gets attacked, and I find some Chinese browser or Chinese version of a search engine shows up instead of when I want to use Google, you
Right.
know, and it's in Google's own product, and there's something about the openness of that software that allows it to get attacked easier, I think.
What advice would you give somebody who might be considering using a Mac in their practice?
Yeah, I wouldn't hesitate. As an architect, the only thing I can think of that off the top of my head that would cause me any kind of second thoughts is be like if I'm going to be using Revit, it doesn't run natively, so I have to worry about parallels or something like that. But other than that, I wouldn't I wouldn't hesitate. I would just say you do pay for what you get. It seems like it's maybe a little bit more expensive than what I could get if I wanted to get a Windows machine of some kind, but the Windows machine, the bits and pieces are coming from various different places, whereas everything is so tightly controlled within the within the Mac world that it just doesn't mess up, it
Yeah.
just works fluidly. That's my idea. So you save a lot of time, I think, at the end of the day.
Well, Chris, I appreciate you sharing your Apple and Mac experience. And before we wrap that section of the show up, can you share with the audience one app or utility or possibly a service that you find most useful?
I think I'd go back to that. I mean, it's not Apple centric, but that Ring Central that we use, that that phone thing, especially with its messaging capabilities built in, it's just been a key element of our ability to work, especially when there's remote work involved. And I think when we're all here together, it'll keep me from yelling across the office to get someone's attention.
Right. You can just quote unquote text them.
Yeah, it'll be like texting them essentially. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Thanks for sharing that.
Okay.
All right. So now on to our final segment, the 10 questions. So the first question is, what is your favorite word?
I'm going to say the word interesting is probably my favorite word because it's the word I use all the time, and my wife is like, "What do you mean by that?"
What is your least favorite word?
That I can't think of anything specifically. I mean, yeah, beige, I think, is my least favorite word.
What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Well, I think we talked about this a little earlier, but traveling, being out and about in civilization, sort of seeing the creativity of people, just learning new stuff, seeing new things, that really, makes me like super happy.
What turns you off?
Obnoxiousness, when people are obnoxious, that's a killer.
What sound or noise do you love?
Yeah, I think like the wind rustling in trees, there's a certain, especially on a certain period of the year, like in early autumn, like when it's just a little bit of cool crispness in that air, when the wind makes the leaves rustle. I like that.
What sound or noise do you hate?
I share this hatred of this noise with my two dogs, and that's motorcycles. I have no idea why you have to have, mufflers on cars, and cars cannot be loud, but motorcycles can be as loud as anybody wants. Or as loud as we all don't want, I understand that that people who drive them like that rumbly stuff, but maybe we could make the handlebars vibrate instead of making the thing so loud as, all get out.
What's your favorite curse word?
I got to say the F word is my go-to.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Um, a professional traveler is what I would like to be.
What profession would you not like to do?
My experience tells me I would never want to be a mechanical engineer. I have all the respect in the world for those guys that they do it, because I'm going to say 75% of the issues that we have on projects revolve around something to do with the mechanical systems. And so it feels like it's like a never-ending battle trying to get things to work. And I don't think I could put up with the disappointment on that regular basis.
If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
I think I would like him to say, "I can't wait to introduce you to some really new, interesting people."
Oh, that's great, Chris. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Inside the Apple Studio. Please let the listeners know where they can find you online.
So we are at www.ma-ke-arch.com. So ma-ke-arch.com. That's where you'll find us.
Awesome. Great. Thanks again, Chris. I appreciate you joining me for this episode.
All right, I really enjoyed it too, and we have to clasp eyes on each other a few more times and not let it go so long.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so
All
much,
right.
Chris. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
I have been your host, Neal Pan, and thank you for listening to this episode of Inside the Apple Studio. I'd like to thank my guest, Chris Kennedy, for joining me, and Monograph for their support. Learn more about Monograph at monograph.com. Find the show in your favorite podcast player by searching for Inside the Apple Studio, and help support the show by leaving a 5-star rating and comment in Apple Podcasts. You can also help support the show by telling a friend. This is the best way to help the show grow. Remember to follow the show by selecting the follow button in Apple Podcasts or in your favorite podcast app. You can find me on Twitter at NPANN or the show at Apple for Arc. That's Apple, FORARCH. Inside the Apple Studio is a production of Apple for Architects at appleforarchitects.com.
That whole thing about knowledge transfer from the experienced person to the inexperienced person. I mean, you can do some of that, but it really, in my whole career, it just seems like, why do each one of us in turn have to make the same mistakes?
Yeah.
Why can't we just eliminate some things completely and make different mistakes?
Yeah. Yeah. I one of the questions I was contemplating when you were talking that I didn't go into, because I think we've covered a lot in that first part.
Yeah.
But it is really very interesting, the changes over the last 30 years in architecture. You could even say 40 years, from the early 80s, have been so drastically different than the preceding 30 or 40 years in the world of architecture, right? I mean, from 1950 to, well, let's say 1940 to 1980, right? The changes in architecture were minimal. At least, I don't know. We didn't, well, for the most part, we didn't experience that. But at least in recollection, it is nothing like what we've experienced over our careers. It's been very difficult for our careers, I think.
I think the earlier 40 years that you were saying, I think the only thing that happened in that period of time was thermally broken windows. And since then,
and the calculator, maybe.
Yeah, and the calculator. But the just the material changes, the different ways of using things, there were stylistic changes, I think, a little bit earlier, occasionally, but this people adhere to even to certain styles more specifically. Now we've got like the greatest mishmash of things. I mean, we've got some really amazing, like, transitional kind of things between, very traditional and very modern, that blend the two together in certain ways. And, and then there's, but yes, materials, methods of working. I mean, here's the other thing as a firm owner that's always interesting, is like, back when I started, I brought my triangles, my scales, my everything. I got a parallel bar and a desk.
Yep.
That was what was supplied.
And maybe a lamp, right?
Maybe a lamp.
Yes.
Everything else was mine. All the tools were mine.
Yeah.
Now I got to come up with 2 monitors, a laptop, monitor arms, a stand sit desk, a really nice chair. I mean, I sat on a metal stool when I first started.
So did I.
So yeah, it's wild.